I left at exactly 4:11 a.m. The streets were still wet from last night's rain, and the neighborhood was asleep, just like they had been for the past 22 years of my life. I didn't slam the door. I didn't leave the porch light on. I didn't even glance back. In my left hand was a worn canvas duffel, and in my chest was a silence so heavy it hurt to breathe. It wasn't goodbye. It was escape. I had no plan, no destination, no one waiting at the other end of the bus line, but I had something better. I had resolve. The moment it all cracked open, it wasn't dramatic, not in the way you'd think. There were no shouting matches, no broken plates or police calls. Just a dinner table, candlelight, a roast chicken, and my father's cold gray eyes. The night had started with celebration. Miles had graduated. Our family's golden boy. The one who barely passed freshman year, but still got standing ovations at home. Mom had made her special mashed potatoes. She even brought out the good china, the kind only used on Christmas or when someone was dying. That should have been the first sign. Miles sat across from me, grinning from ear to ear, describing his commencement speech like he'd just won a Nobel. Mom clapped. Dad poured wine. I cut my chicken into tiny pieces, waiting for someone to ask about my final project or the 2 shifts I worked that day. No one did. Then came the moment. Dad tapped his glass, theatrically like he was at some company gala. "Your mother and I have been thinking," he said, "and we want to do something special for Miles." Miles did that fake modest shrug. "You really didn't have to. We got you the Camry," Dad said. "But not the old one. A brand new one. Pearl white. Leather interior." Mom's eyes sparkled. "You deserve it, baby." Something inside me cracked. It wasn't jealousy. It was the recognition that this would never be my moment, no matter how hard I tried. Still, I forced a smile. "That's great, Miles. Congrats." Then I asked it, the question I didn't know would burn down the room. "So, what happens to the old Camry?" The silence was immediate. Mom and Dad exchanged that married couple look that lasts half a second, but carries 1,000 messages. Dad set down his fork, wiped his mouth slowly with his napkin, and looked straight at me. "Actually, Cassandra, your mother and I were going to talk to you about that." Something shifted in his tone. I felt it before I heard it. "You're 22. You have a job. It's time you start contributing more around here." I blinked. "Contributing? We've decided it's only fair that you pay rent. $800 a month. First Sunday of every month. Starting next week." I thought he was joking. I looked to Mom. Her eyes dropped to her plate. Miles cleared his throat, pretending to focus on the wine label. "You're serious?" I asked. Dad leaned back like a CEO in his throne. "You're not in school full-time. You're working. That means you can pay. Miles is in college. I'm in college too. Online, but it's still college. I have finals next week." He waved a hand. "It's different. You don't understand." The air felt like it thickened. My throat tightened. I wasn't going to cry, not here. Not in front of them. I swallowed hard and whispered, "Why does Miles get a car for graduating, and I get a bill just for existing?" That's when it happened. Dad's face twisted, not with rage, but something colder. Contempt. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand up. He simply reached for his glass of water, and with a flick of his wrist, threw it across the table. It hit me square in the chest. The glass didn't break, but the silence did. Water soaked through my shirt. I sat frozen as droplets slid down my collarbone, the smell of roast chicken mixing with cold rage. Mom gasped. Miles looked away. And Dad picked up his wine, took a sip, and said, "Don't speak to me like that at my table." I didn't respond. I stood up slowly, grabbed my napkin, wiped my face, and began collecting plates like I always did after dinner. Not a word, not a scream, just a calm efficiency that scared even me, because I already knew. This wasn't my home anymore. It never had been. And I wasn't going to stay another night pretending that it was. The next morning, no one mentioned the water. Not Dad, not Mom, not Miles. It was as if the glass had never left his hand, as if the liquid hadn't clung to my skin and sunk into my spine like ice. Instead, breakfast was buttered toast and silence. Dad read the paper. Mom asked Miles if he wanted eggs. I poured my own coffee quietly and stared at the bubbling black surface like it might give me the answers I needed. This wasn't new. It had always been like this in the Doyle household. Smooth on the surface, jagged underneath. What mattered wasn't truth or fairness or even love. It was appearance, control. And the way they kept that control was by pretending nothing was ever wrong. If someone cried, they were too sensitive. If someone questioned, they were ungrateful. If someone got hurt, they must have deserved it somehow. Growing up, I learned the rules quickly. Rule 1, never embarrass the family in public. Rule 2, Miles is the future, you're the fallback. Rule 3, do what you're told, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be left alone. I was never abused, not in the way people define it. No bruises, no belts, but I was constantly made to feel small, inconvenient, like an obligation they didn't ask for, but got stuck with anyway. I remember being 10 and hearing Mom tell Aunt Karen on the phone, Miles is our bright one. Cassandra's quiet. She likes to read. She's easy. Like I was a houseplant. Low maintenance. Barely alive. By high school, the pattern had set in deep. Miles wrecked Dad's Lexus one summer, taking it out without permission and crashing it into a stop sign. Dad didn't yell. He laughed. Boys will be boys. When I forgot to pick up the dry cleaning once because I had the flu, I got grounded for a week and had my phone taken away. I learned not to expect fairness. I learned to keep my head down and aim low. That's when I started working. First at a bookstore, then waiting tables, sometimes both in the same day. I saved every dollar I could. I took online classes at night. I started a handmade jewelry business on Etsy, slowly building a small but loyal customer base. My little victories, the ones no one clapped for. Once, at dinner, I tried to share a win. I had reached 1,000 followers on Instagram and gotten featured in a local artisan blog. Before I could finish my sentence, Miles announced he had been invited to shadow a regional manager at his internship. The conversation spun away from me instantly. Dad nodded, proud. Mom clapped. I went back to my green beans. They didn't mean to erase me. Not actively. But erasure doesn't always come from malice. Sometimes it comes from the way people never see you in the first place. Dad loved to talk about investments. Everything was an investment to him. Real estate, stocks, even Miles. I'm not just giving him a degree, he'd say. I'm building a legacy. But I wasn't a legacy. I was a budget line. When I asked for help covering a textbook one semester, Dad told me, that's what your part-time job is for. When I offered to pay the phone bill once, he looked surprised. You actually have money for that, he said like it was a joke. Even Mom, who should have known better, played along. She decorated the fridge with Miles' honor roll certificates and internship offers. My GPA, which had quietly stayed at a 3.9 despite everything, was never mentioned. Once, when a neighbor asked what I was up to, she smiled and said, Cassandra's still figuring things out. Still figuring things out. As if working 60 hours a week, running a small business, and studying at night was the same as floating through life aimlessly. As if effort without applause didn't count. But the truth is, I had been preparing for escape longer than I realized. I didn't know it then, not exactly, but something in me had been packing its bags for years, quietly, methodically, waiting for the moment when the weight would be too much and I'd finally choose myself over them. And when that cup of water hit my chest, the moment had arrived. It started like any other Sunday. Roast in the oven, Miles on the couch bragging about something minor as if he'd just saved a village, and Mom humming while folding the cloth napkins. The only thing that felt different, eerily different, was the china, the good china, the one with the navy and gold rim that hadn't seen daylight since Grandma Margaret's last Christmas. I paused when I saw it set out. "What's the occasion?" I asked. Mom didn't look up. "Oh, it's nothing," she said lightly. "Just thought we'd do something nice for Miles. He's our graduate." My fingers brushed the edge of the porcelain plate, and a cold coil twisted in my stomach. The last time I'd seen this set was when we got the call about Aunt Lily's terminal diagnosis. The china didn't come out for birthdays or anniversaries, only when something was about to shift. Dinner itself was a performance, as always. Miles sat at Dad's right hand, animated and glowing, telling stories from his last semester like he'd just come back from war. He laughed at his own jokes, and Mom followed suit like a trained echo. I knew this part of the play well. My role was simple. Listen, smile, nod at the right moments, and don't take up space. But that night I couldn't sit still. Every laugh from Miles sounded louder than it should. Every clink of silverware on porcelain set my teeth on edge. I kept waiting for someone to notice how I'd worked through the flu last week, how my hands were still sore from stringing bracelets until 2 a.m., how I had silently covered the internet bill again because Mom forgot. Again, they didn't notice. And then Dad set down his wine glass with a little thud, his voice dipping into that dramatic, boardroom tone he loved to use. "Your mother and I have been talking," he began, lifting his chin like an MC. "And we've decided we want to do something special for Miles." Miles leaned back, clearly expecting the crown and scepter. "Ah, you guys didn't have to." "We got you the Camry," Dad said. "The new one. Pearl white. Leather interior. The works." Mom clasped her hands together like she was watching a marriage proposal. "You earned it, sweetheart." My fork slipped. The clang of metal on china made everyone glance my way, briefly. I picked it up slowly, trying not to tremble. "Wow," I said, my voice hollow. "That's really great. Congratulations, Miles." Miles smirked and made some half-grateful noise, but my eyes were on Dad. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even surprised, but I needed to know the full shape of the injustice. "So, what happens to the old Camry?" I asked, calm, curious. There was that look again, Dad and Mom trading silent messages in a half-beat of eye contact. Dad's tone hardened. "Actually, Cassandra, we've been meaning to talk to you." I nodded. "Okay, about what?" "You're 22. You work. You live here without contributing much. It's time to step up." "Step up," I repeated slowly. "We're going to start charging you rent," he said. $800 a month. First payments due next Sunday." I blinked. 800. "That's more than fair," Dad added, "considering the space and utilities." Miles said nothing. Not a word. Mom folded her napkin with laser focus, as if the creases mattered more than my reaction. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Miles lived here till this year. He never paid rent. He was in college. I'm in college. Online courses don't count." My breath caught. The logic was nonsense, twisted into some grotesque version of fairness. "So I work, I study, I pay my own expenses, and now I get charged for existing under the same roof." Dad leaned back like a man sealing a deal. "That's how adulthood works, Cassandra." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't storm away. I looked him dead in the eye and said quietly, "Why does Miles get a brand new car and I get a bill?" That's when it happened. The flick of his wrist, the arch of cold water, the silence that followed, his wine glass in one hand, the now empty water glass in the other, my shirt soaked, my dignity shattered but intact. And Mom said nothing. Miles said nothing. I stood there dripping, and I knew I was done playing my part in this family's theater of denial. That night I didn't sleep, not even a little. I lay in bed staring at the pale pink ceiling, painted when I was 7, never changed because why bother? The room didn't belong to me. It never had. Most of the furniture was hand-me-downs from cousins who'd outgrown them, the walls decorated with pictures I never chose. Even my closet smelled faintly of someone else's life. Outside my window, the world was still. The street lamp buzzed. A cat cried somewhere in the distance. And in my mind, the water hit me over and over again, the shock, the cold, the silence that followed. I kept replaying it, not because it hurt, but because it clarified everything. This house was never home. It was a cage built with fine china and invisible expectations. By 2 a.m., I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to throw anything or deliver some dramatic speech. That would give them something to hold against me. No, I would do what I'd always done, move quietly unnoticed. But this time it wouldn't be surrender. It would be strategy. I got out of bed and made a list. Not on paper, just in my mind. What I needed, what I could carry, what I absolutely had to take with me if I never came back. My laptop. It had my business files, my order history, and everything I'd built on my own. My grandmother's jewelry box, tucked behind the bookshelf, with the initials MED carved into the wood. A bundle of letters she'd written me that I wasn't supposed to have. One's mom had said were lost after Margaret went into assisted living. And finally, the 3 leather-bound journals I'd found in a crate in the attic the year she passed. I hadn't read them fully, but I knew they mattered. They were filled with newspaper clippings, receipts, handwritten notes and margins, even legal forms. No one else in the family knew I had them. And for once, I was glad I'd disobeyed Dad when he said to throw the box away. I started packing the next day. Slowly, carefully, just one item at a time into a large canvas duffel I slid under my bed. A few changes of clothes, comfortable shoes, important documents, no trace of emotion, no mess. I still went to work at the bookstore that afternoon, smiled at customers, gave a recommendation for a mystery novel, then clocked out and went straight to the diner for my night shift. No one suspected anything. I was the same Cassandra they'd always known. Quiet, reliable, responsible. And that's exactly how I wanted it. Over dinner that evening, Dad made another comment about how kids these days have no grit. I nodded politely. Miles talked about job interviews. I passed him the salt. Mom asked if I could help her organize receipts for tax season. I smiled and said of course. The performance continued, flawless as always, but underneath it I was already gone. On Thursday I wrote the letter. I didn't cry while writing it. I didn't even pause. I started with the date, then the salutation. To the Doyle family, and then I wrote everything, not in anger, not in pleading, like a ledger, an audit. Every time I had covered for Miles when he messed up, every family event where I had been told to let him shine, every dollar I'd spent on groceries when the fridge was empty, every job I worked while being told I wasn't trying hard enough, every time my name had been left out of stories told at parties, and at the bottom, a line in bold, deliberate handwriting. You won't find me unless I want to be found. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. That letter wasn't a goodbye. It was an invoice, and the debt was long overdue. Saturday night passed in a blur. I couldn't eat. I pushed my food around while Dad droned on about rising mortgage rates like it was breaking news. Miles played with his car keys, dangling them with a kind of casual arrogance I couldn't unsee anymore. Mom asked if I could help her pick out a tie for Miles' upcoming job interview. I said I had to work. She frowned but didn't push. Later in my room, I zipped up the duffel bag and set it by the door. It wasn't heavy. Most of my life fit into less than 30 pounds. That fact alone was telling. At 3:30 a.m. I got dressed. Jeans, hoodie, the kind of clothes you wear when you need to blend in, when invisibility becomes armor. I sat on the edge of my bed for 5 minutes, staring at the same wallpaper border of butterflies that Mom had picked out when I was in 2nd grade. I hated those butterflies. Always had. They never looked like they were flying. They looked trapped. I slipped the letter onto the kitchen table, right next to the sugar bowl. Mom always made her coffee first thing. She'd find it. I wondered if she'd read the whole thing, or if she'd stop at the first uncomfortable truth and tear it up. It didn't matter. I hadn't written it for their understanding. I'd written it for my own freedom. I avoided the third stair on the way down. It creaked. I avoided the loose board by the front door. I'd mapped my escape like someone planning a heist. Not because I feared being stopped, but because I didn't want to give them even a single excuse to paint me as dramatic, unstable, or reckless. I wanted them to wake up and realize I had been gone for hours, maybe even days. The street outside was dark and still. My breath fogged in the cold air. I walked the 5 blocks to the bus station with my head down, my steps steady. The duffel strap dug into my shoulder, but I didn't shift it. Pain was temporary. Leaving was forever. Inside the terminal, it smelled like burnt coffee and wet rubber. A janitor mopped a corner. A woman with 2 toddlers tried to get them to nap on a bench. The security guard nodded at me, then looked away. No one asked questions. No one cared. And for the first time, I liked it that way. I paid in cash. One-way ticket. For states away. I didn't give a forwarding address. I didn't check the departure board twice. I sat in the back row of the bus and stared out the window, watching the streetlights flicker past like ghosts of a life I was no longer part of. I should have been scared. I had no concrete plan, no job lined up, no apartment waiting with clean sheets and a stocked fridge. But instead of fear, I felt something I hadn't tasted in years. Relief. I texted one person. Just one. Cassandra Doyle here. I don't know if you remember me, but I'm on my way. Please don't turn me away. See, I sent it to Iris Callahan, my godmother, my grandmother Margaret's best friend, the woman my parents had scrubbed from all family conversations after some mysterious falling out over money and property years ago. I didn't know what had happened, but I remembered her. I remembered how, when I was 9, Iris had given me a birthday card with a $20 bill and a note that said, "Buy something that makes you feel seen." I remembered how she'd whispered to me at Grandma's funeral, "You are stronger than they know. One day that will matter." I remembered her blue eyes, her silver hair, and the way Dad's jaw tightened whenever her name came up. The bus pulled out of the station as the sun began to rise, thin gold bleeding across the sky. I leaned my head against the cold glass. My hometown blurred behind me, a smudge of memories and unfinished conversations. I didn't know where I was going exactly. I only knew it was somewhere they couldn't follow, and somewhere I could finally begin again. I didn't expect her to be there. I hadn't told her what time the bus would arrive or which station I'd be getting off at. But when I stepped off into the crisp morning air of Flagstaff, Arizona, she was there, leaning against a dusty blue Subaru, arms crossed, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Still like to make dramatic exits, huh?" she said. My throat tightened. "You remembered me." "I never forgot you, Cassandra," she replied. "You just forgot to ask for help." Her hug was brief but firm, like she wasn't one for sentiment, but also wasn't going to let me fall apart just yet. She didn't ask questions. She took my bag without a word and opened the passenger door like it was the most natural thing in the world, like I belonged there. Iris's house was nothing like the Doyle home. Hers was messy, lived in, and unapologetically warm. Books lined every surface, cookbooks, biographies, novels with cracked spines and dog-eared corners. Plants spilled from hanging baskets and mismatched ceramic pots. There was a scent of coffee, cinnamon, and lemon oil soaked into the wood. Bathrooms down the hall. Kitchens always open. And that room upstairs. "Yours for as long as you need it," she said as we stepped inside. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, the silence wrapping around me not like a threat, but like a blanket. I wasn't being observed. I wasn't being measured. I was just allowed to be. Later, after I'd showered and eaten a piece of toast she insisted I slather with butter, I finally said the words that had been stuck in my chest since the bus left Boise. My dad threw a glass of water at me because I asked why my brother got a car and I got a rent bill. Iris didn't gasp. She didn't say she was sorry in that shallow, automatic way people do. She just shook her head slowly and muttered, "Philip hasn't changed a damn bit. You know him, I said, more a statement than a question. I know the kind of man he is, she replied. Always needed to control the narrative. Even married your mother for it. I blinked. What? He never loved her. Not in the way real love works. He loved what she represented. The Doyle name. The family assets. Your grandmother's connections. Marrying Lorraine was a business move. I sat back, letting her words settle like dust in the air. Iris stood and opened a cabinet, pulling down a faded leather folder. There's something you need to see. Inside were copies of old property deeds, financial reports, and a trust document dated 3 years before Grandma Margaret died. My name was on it, Cassandra Elise Doyle, and the sum attached was staggering. I don't understand, I whispered. I never received anything. Because your father had power of attorney, Iris said softly. He redirected it. Legally, it's theft, but he did it quietly, subtly, enough that no one noticed. My hands shook as I turned the pages. Legal terms blurred. But what stood out wasn't the money. It was the fact that someone had believed in me enough to protect my future, and someone else had stolen it without hesitation. There's more, Iris said. Those journals you brought. They're Margaret's. She kept records of everything. And if I'm not mistaken, she left clues about what Philip did, and how to prove it. I felt the walls inside me shift. For so long, I'd been gaslit into believing my instincts were wrong, that I was ungrateful, dramatic, too sensitive. But now, with proof in hand and the quiet strength of the woman sitting across from me, I could feel something else beginning to stir. Not anger, not yet, just clarity, and underneath it, something harder, sharper, resolve. The next morning, I laid all 3 of Grandma Margaret's journals across the kitchen table. Sunlight spilled in through the lace curtains, and the smell of strong coffee filled the room. Iris sat across from me, flipping through one of the volumes with a reverence I hadn't expected. Her fingers moved slowly, tracing the ink like it was sacred. She was meticulous, Iris said, documented everything, not just financials. She recorded conversations, meetings, even suspicions. She knew Philip was up to something. I opened the second journal, the one bound in green leather with a brass clasp. Inside were handwritten pages, her tidy, looping script filling every line. Between entries, she'd slipped newspaper clippings, court notices, even a photocopy of a signature that looked familiar. I leaned closer. This is my name. Iris nodded. Look at the loops. The pressure. The way the D is off-center. That's not your handwriting, Cassandra. It's a forgery. I stared at the page, heat rising in my chest. It was an enrollment transfer document authorizing the reallocation of education savings from my account to Miles Doyle. I pushed the chair back and stood up. He knew. He had to know. Iris didn't argue. She just said, which means we need a lawyer. Not just for emotional closure, but to build a case. That afternoon, we drove across town to a small law office nestled between a florist and a used bookstore. The brass plate outside read, Grant Whitmore, J.D. Family and Financial Law. Grant was in his early 40s with a calm, focused energy and eyes that missed nothing. He didn't try to soften his words, but he didn't weaponize them either. After I explained what we'd found, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Cases like this are more common than you'd think, he said. When one family member has power, legal or emotional, they often find ways to exploit others, especially daughters, especially the quiet ones. I slid the trust document across the table. Can we fight this? He skimmed it, then looked up. It'll be a battle. But yes, we can. I felt a rush of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in weeks. Hope. We'll need more than the journals, he added. We'll need transaction records, emails, anything that shows intent. But the trust is strong. Your grandmother's language is clear. And if your signature was forged on any document, that's a felony. Iris tapped the folder. We have everything Margaret ever touched. She didn't just keep records, she built a paper wall. We just need to know how to use it. Grant began the process immediately. That night, while he filed for an injunction to freeze the accounts and preserve any remaining assets, I sat on Iris's porch with a blanket and the green journal across my lap. I reread the trust clause over and over. This fund shall be made available to Cassandra Elise Doyle upon her 21st birthday, without condition or oversight, to ensure her independence and self-determination. It was dated 6 months before I was hospitalized. 6 months before everything had started to unravel. I remembered that time, how I'd try to keep up with work, school, my business, and still make dinner twice a week. How I'd stopped sleeping. How one day I collapsed on the floor of the bookstore's supply closet and couldn't stand up. The diagnosis was exhaustion, depression, anxiety. 2 weeks in a facility, followed by months of silence at home. No one ever asked how I was really doing. And during that time, Dad had claimed power of attorney for my protection and stolen what was mine. I closed the journal slowly. This wasn't just theft. This was betrayal. This was sabotage. And now, I wasn't the one quietly suffering in a pink-painted room anymore. I had records. I had witnesses. I had a lawyer. And I had the truth. 3 days after Grant filed the injunction, the first crack in the Doyle family facade became visible to the public. Miles was arrested for DUI. I saw the news the way most people do, through a screen. Iris slid her phone across the table while we ate breakfast. The headline read, "Local graduate arrested for DUI faces property damage charges after driving into hardware storefront." Below it, a mugshot I almost didn't recognize. He looked smaller, dazed. No golden boy grin, just red-rimmed eyes and a vacant expression. "Looks like the foundation's starting to crumble," Iris murmured, sipping her tea. I didn't speak. I just stared at the image, remembering the boy who used to build blanket forts with me, and the man who sat silent while our father demanded I pay to live in my own childhood home. Later that day, I received a message from an unfamiliar account on one of my old social media profiles. The name was Tessa Briggs. I didn't know her. Not really. But her message made my pulse spike. "Hi, this is going to sound strange. I used to date your brother. I heard what's happening, and I think there are some things you should know. Can we meet? I have proof." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop 2 towns over. Neutral ground. Tessa arrived first, already seated with a latte and a phone clutched in both hands like a lifeline. She was petite, with tired eyes and a nervous energy that reminded me of a bird ready to flee. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know this is weird." "I've had weirder weeks," I replied. She offered a tight smile. So, I dated Miles for about 6 months. Toward the end, he started drinking more, acting erratic. I thought it was just stress, but sometimes when he drank, he'd talk too much. I waited. One night, he said something about how your dad made him sign papers he didn't understand. That it had to do with college money that was supposed to be yours. My stomach twisted. Did he say it outright? Tessa hesitated, then pulled out her phone. I started recording some of our conversations. He had a way of turning things around on me, and I wanted to protect myself. "There's one clip I think you need to hear." She pressed play. Miles's voice came through, slurred but clear. "Dad says family money should go to the family's best investment. He said Cassandra wouldn't know what to do with it anyway. But she works so hard, Tess. She works harder than I ever have. Sometimes I think about telling her the truth, but Dad would lose it. He says it's all handled now, that it's better this way." I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the recording ended. He knew, I whispered. He's known all along. Tessa nodded slowly. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to reach you. But when I saw what happened, I figured you deserved to hear it." I copied the file to my phone. "Thank you. You've helped more than you know." Before I left, she added, "For what it's worth, I think he cares about you. He's just weak." And your dad? He's dangerous, Cassandra. The kind of man who convinces everyone they're the problem except him. As I drove back to Iris's house, the recording replayed in my mind. I thought about the boy I'd once trusted with my secrets, the brother I had defended, the man who had stayed silent while my future was handed to him on a silver platter. And still, part of me didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. I wanted truth. And now I had evidence. Real, undeniable proof that the golden son wasn't just a passive recipient of our father's manipulation. He had been complicit, maybe not for malice. But silence, too, is a kind of violence. And I was done being its victim. The following Monday, Grant filed a formal complaint for trust fraud and financial abuse with the state probate court. By Tuesday, the court had approved our emergency motion to freeze all remaining assets tied to my grandmother's estate. My father, Philip Doyle, would be served the next day. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just sat on Iris's porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the storm roll in across the valley and waiting for the thunder to strike. It came that evening. First, a voicemail from my mother, her voice thin, brittle, as if she'd aged 20 years in 2 minutes. Cassandra, please call us. We're worried. I don't know what's happening, but whatever this is, we can talk about it, can't we? Please just talk to me. Then a text from Dad. Short. Cold. End this now. You're embarrassing the family. Come home, and we'll forget this ever happened. I didn't reply. And finally, Miles. His message was longer, Messier. Less rehearsed. Viv, what did you say in that letter? Dad's furious. Mom's crying every day. Just tell me what's going on. Please. The irony made my throat tighten. Now they wanted answers. Now they wanted my voice. After all those years of silence, my refusal to play along was suddenly too loud for them to ignore. But it was too late. That week, Grant began pulling records. Transaction histories, bank logs, paper trails Dad had probably thought were buried deep enough never to resurface. But Margaret Doyle hadn't just written with elegance, she filed with precision. Every transfer, every signature, every date had been catalogued. The more we uncovered, the worse it became. My grandmother had intended for me to inherit not just the trust fund, but partial ownership of a commercial property in downtown Boise, something my parents had sold a year after her death. The sale had been pushed through using a forged authorization document with my forged signature. This isn't just unethical, Grant told me as he spread the evidence across his desk. It's criminal. He sent a cease and desist letter to my father that same afternoon. The response came in a form I didn't expect. Rowan Miles was arrested again, this time for drunk driving, and crashing through the front window of Morrison's Hardware, the same hardware store that had been owned by the Doyle family before the mysterious restructuring. Iris showed me the news article. I stared at his mugshot again. This time he looked hollow, shattered, like someone who had finally realized the house of cards he'd been propped up in was collapsing around him. He's unraveling, Iris said. Your father's losing control of him. I was the pressure valve, I murmured. They used me to absorb everything, and now that I'm gone, the system's breaking. Let it break, she said. You don't owe them your silence anymore. But part of me still needed to know. Not to rescue, not to forgive, just to confront the ghost in the room that once felt like my brother. So when the jail called, informing me that Miles had listed me as his emergency contact, I didn't hang up. I listened, and then I agreed to see him. That night, I sat in a cold plastic chair in a fluorescent-lit visitation room, staring through a pane of glass at the boy who used to hand me gummy worms during road trips, and the man who had signed away my future with a pen he didn't understand. His orange jumpsuit was too big. His face was pale. His hands trembled. Viv, he said softly. Thank God. I didn't answer. I waited. They won't come, he continued. Dad said, I made my bed, so now I can lie in it. Mom, she wanted to, but he wouldn't let her. I watched him squirm under my silence. Then I asked, "Did you know?" He looked down. His voice broke. "Yeah, I knew." My throat tightened. I pressed my hand flat on the glass, not for comfort, but to show him something very clear, that I was real, that I wasn't going away, and that this conversation would be the first one where I finally got to ask the questions and he'd have to answer them. I didn't tell Iris I was going back. I left a note on the table, next to the tea tin, just 3 words. "It's time. See." The Doyle house looked smaller than I remembered. The hedges were overgrown. The porch light flickered like it couldn't decide if it was dying or just tired of staying lit. I stood at the edge of the driveway, watching my reflection shift in the car window. I hadn't worn makeup, hadn't styled my hair. I didn't need armor. I brought truth. Mom opened the door before I could knock. Her eyes were puffy, and her voice was the softest I'd ever heard it. "He's in his study." She didn't hug me. She didn't ask me to stay for dinner. She just stepped aside, as if she already knew this wasn't a homecoming, it was an ending. I walked past the kitchen, past the framed photos of Miles graduating and Dad shaking hands with city council members. Not one photo of me. Not even the one I remembered from 3rd grade, the one Grandma Margaret had paid to have framed. The study door was ajar. Dad didn't look up when I entered. He sat behind his desk, flipping through a folder like he hadn't just watched his empire begin to crumble. "You finally grew a spine," he said without greeting. I didn't flinch. "You finally lost your leash." He looked up at that, eyes cold, calculating, trying to find an angle. "You think you've won something? All you've done is destroy this family." "I didn't destroy anything," I said calmly. "I just stopped playing along." "You always had a problem with authority." "No," I corrected. "I had a problem with liars." His hand twitched. "This little stunt, lawyers, court orders, frozen accounts. You think it makes you powerful?" "No, but it makes me free." There was a silence then, heavy, almost sacred. Then he said it, his voice low and bitter. "You were never meant to inherit that money. Margaret may have written your name, but she didn't understand what it meant. You would have wasted it." "She understood more than you ever did," I said. "She knew exactly who I was, and who you were." I pulled the manila envelope from my bag and laid it on the desk. Inside were photocopies of the journals, the forged signature documents, the trust declaration, and, most damning of all, the audio clip from Miles. Dad stared at it like it was a snake coiled on his mahogany desk. "I'm giving you a choice," I said. "You can cooperate with the court, admit to the forgery, return whatever's left, or I take this to the district attorney and let the charges fall where they may." "You wouldn't dare." I leaned forward, voice steady. "Try me." He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. For a moment, I thought he might throw something again. Maybe another glass. Maybe worse. But all he did was grip the edge of the desk like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "You're not my daughter anymore," he spat. And for the first time in my life, that didn't hurt. "I know," I said. "You made that clear the day you chose Miles' convenience over my future. The day you threw water at me for asking why I deserved less." He didn't reply. I turned to leave. At the door I paused. "By the way," I said without turning around, "I'm changing my last name." A pause. "To what?" I smiled. "To Doyle, the way Grandma meant it." The trial didn't drag on. Once Grant submitted the evidence, especially the forged documents and the audio confession, Philip's legal team realized fighting would only deepen the damage. Within a month, we had a settlement agreement. It wasn't just about the money. It was about acknowledgement. Philip Doyle signed a public affidavit admitting to mismanagement of funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and falsification of legal records tied to my grandmother's estate. In exchange, we agreed not to pursue criminal charges, though the DA still launched a separate investigation. His name would never hold the same weight in Boise again. As for the money, the trust was restored. I received the remaining balance, partial ownership of the downtown property, and control over a grant my grandmother had started, one that supported young women in business. It felt poetic. The very thing Dad tried to erase became the foundation I would use to uplift others. Miles left town shortly after the settlement. I heard through Tessa that he checked into a rehab center out in New Mexico. I didn't call him. I didn't send a letter. But I hoped quietly that somewhere in that silence he'd finally face the boy he used to be and maybe, just maybe, choose to become a better man. Mom never apologized. Not in words. But one afternoon, a package arrived at Iris's door. No return address. Inside was a photo one I hadn't seen in years. Me, on my 6th birthday, grinning with frosting on my chin. Grandma Margaret's arm wrapped around me like a shield. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, were 4 words: "She always loved you." I didn't cry. Not for them. Not anymore. Instead, I stood on the steps of the Margaret Doyle Women's Center, formerly the Doyle Business Annex, and cut the ribbon beside the mayor, 3 scholarship recipients, and Iris. The plaque outside read, "For every daughter told she was too much, too loud, too expensive, or too late, this space is yours now." I gave a speech. Nothing dramatic. Just the truth. "I used to think revenge was about taking something back," I said to the small crowd. "But maybe real revenge is building something they can't destroy, and walking away from the ruins, with your head high and your heart intact." The applause was soft, sincere. Afterward, I found a quiet bench under the elm trees out front. The air smelled like jasmine and wet concrete. A young girl, maybe 14, wandered by with a notebook and sat a few feet away, sketching the building's front arch. She glanced at me and smiled. "Did you build this?" she asked. "In a way," I said. She nodded, eyes wide. "It's pretty." I smiled back. "So are you." We sat there for a while, 2 strangers in the sun, no glass between us, no water thrown, no lies hanging in the air. Just peace. Just the sound of a name, finally spoken with pride.